Hey everyone, Srini here from NotionEssentials.com, and today what I want to talk about is how you plan your days or your week with Notion for what Cal Newport calls deep work. Deep work basically is the ability to work on a very demanding task for an extended period of time, and it's really powerful for any type of creative work or anything in terms of breakthroughs. And people who do deep work tend to accomplish really ambitious goals like writing books, starting companies, whatever it is. And so I wanted to talk about how to actually use Notion for deep work. One of the beauties of Notion is that it is actually, in a lot of ways, designed with deep work in mind. Because of the fact that it's an all-in-one workspace, you don't have to constantly switch between apps and tasks and all sorts of stuff, which is actually terrible for your ability to manage your attention. So I want to talk briefly about how I basically created a template specifically for deep work and how you can use this. So one of the first principles of deep work that you really want to adopt is this idea of scheduling every minute of the day, right? And so you'll see here that I've created basically a calendar with a time box or whatever it is. And the idea behind this really is one, to keep your days structured, but also to prevent you from giving into random distractions or impulses. You know, most of us, we get on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, or whatever our distraction of choice it is, by basically default. We don't even tend to end up in a lot of these places, and we still do. Now, obviously, you're going to have tools like distraction blockers and all of that stuff that are necessary. Things like Rescue Time or Hey Focus or Freedom, which are all fantastic tools for blocking distractions, and I recommend that you use any of them. But one thing that helps also is knowing what you're going to do during that time, because if you don't actually structure out your schedule or know what to do during your time, it's really easy to go back to your default behavior of surfing the web for no reason or whatever it is. So by basically putting everything in a schedule, you're able to stick to a schedule. Now, obviously, you're not going to stick to this rigidly. Things come up. But the idea is to work in blocks of time. And as we know from what they call the Pareto principle, you will take the amount of time you have allotted to complete a particular task. So if you say, okay, I'm going to try to finish this thing in 40 minutes, you're much more likely to finish this thing in 40 minutes versus I'm going to give myself, hours. Now, forgive the typos. These are just from my book notes. But yeah, so this is basically the idea of scheduling every minute of the day. Now, there's one other thing that, two other components to this, and that is to, determine whether an activity is shallow or deep. So basically the idea is that, okay, let's take something, for example, like updating your status on social media if you're a business or if you're the owner of the business. Now, how long would it actually take to train a professional, with a college degree to do this? Probably not that long, because of the fact that it doesn't really require intense amounts of training or really specific training. On the other hand, if you are, say, for example, writing code that allows you to build a social media scheduling service, that's a whole different skill level. That actually requires depth. So I think it's important that you quantify the depth of activities, as Cal Newport says. It really depends. So email, meaningless web surfing. Just think about the idea of, okay, could I hand this off to somebody and teach them how to do it in less than a couple of weeks? If that's the case, then it probably is shallow. Whereas if it's something really hard, for example, if you need to learn a programming language in order to build an app, that actually is something that would be considered deep. Reading, writing, those are things that are deep. So those are ways to think about the difference between whether an activity is shallow or deep. Probably one of my favorite parts of Cal's framework for deep work is what he calls the craftsman approach to tool selection. So the thing is that, behind this idea of the craftsman approach is to look at every tool and say, okay, what's the goal that I have? What are the key activities that support that goal? And will the app or tool that I'm using have a negative, a positive, or little impact on the goal? So let's, for example, take something, let's say in my case, one of the things that I want to do is I want to write two deep sort of blog posts a month that are extensive, that help my readers a lot. Now, the thing that you could say is, okay, well, how would it help to be on Twitter? Well, maybe I could have a conversation with somebody on Twitter about this and get some feedback or connect with a few people who might be able to give me some insight. But let's contrast that with a tool like Notion. We're going to get kind of meta here. Well, Notion is actually incredibly helpful. It has a substantially positive impact on my ability to actually write out really detailed articles because of the fact that it's a tool that facilitates deep work. It keeps me in flow, it keeps me from getting distracted. And so, by taking this approach to choosing the tools that you use, whether it's apps, social media services, then you're going to end up being much more discerning about the apps you use because if you're like most people like myself, you can do things like scroll through product content every day. Somebody's inventing something new or cool, or the next big thing that everybody needs to be on, whatever that might be. But you have to ask yourself, is that actually going to support the goal that you have in mind? So as I said, if you have a goal to write a book, the only key activity to support that goal is the writing itself, and probably a distraction for your writing tool, whether that's Notion, whether that's Ulysses or something else, is going to do far more for your ability to write that book than having a Twitter presence will, at least while you're writing the book. So these are kind of the different ways to think about it, but I think the core idea behind this is to plan your day for deep work, because when you do that, you're going to, one, get a lot more done, and you're actually going to spend a lot less time working. And Cal Newport has this equation, which I think is really kind of key, and that is that the quality of work is equal to the time that you spend on it times the intensity of your focus. And when you don't use tools deliberately, and when you're not mindful about what you're actually using, or websites you're visiting, you actually kill that intensity of focus that actually leads to deep work, that leads to quality. So that's the basic overview of how to plan your day in Notion using deep work. Now, you can actually just use tables to create most of these blocks. So this is just a table block inside of Notion. I just split it up into 3 different pages. I did this mainly because it's a reminder for myself, but basically now what I do is I have a daily deep work template. Again, you'll see here that this is my day today. And you can see here, it's create Notion Essentials video. I spent the first couple hours a day writing, and then my roommates and I are taking a trip to the Botanical Gardens in Denver. So as you can see here, this actually leads to a much, much higher level of productivity, and you end up with a lot more free time as well. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or visit notionessentials.com to learn more if you want a free workspace audit.